I will be your moderator.
My name is Kendra Kitley and will be your moderator.
Before we begin, a quick reminder to place your phone on mute until I invite you to speak or to ask your question. And please do not place the call on hold. Available for questions from the media, we have disponible pour répondre aux questions des médias.
Available we have today
In council chambers, Mayor Le Maire Jim Watson, Steve Kanalakis, City Manager, Directeur Municipal, and Anthony DeMonte, General Manager of Emergency and Protective Services, Directeur Général des Services de Protection et d'Urgence. And phoning in today we have Dan Chenier, General Manager, Recreation, Culture and Facility Services, Directeur Général des Loisirs, de la Culture et des Installations, Wendy Stephenson, Chief Financial Officer, Chef des Finances, Stephen Willis, General Manager, Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development, Directeur Général de la Planification, de l'Infrastructure et du Développement économique, and Donna Gray, General Manager, Community and Social Services, Directrice Générale des Services Sociaux et Communautaires. I will now invite each agency to ask their question. You may ask one question with one follow-up. Par ordre alphabétique, j'invite maintenant.
by alphabetical order. I will invite each agency to ask a question. You may ask one question with one follow-up.
Nous allons commencer par Kate Porter, CBC Ottawa.
Hi, it's actually Joanne Canello from CBC. Hello, everyone. So I guess I'm going to start with my question is about the park curfew. Mayor Watson, earlier this week, maybe just yesterday, I think you suggested that you would have liked to have seen an 8 p.m. curfew at all parks across the city. Obviously, that's not what's being proposed now. So can you talk about why you changed your mind as well? We'll hear from you, and also maybe from Steve Kanalakis, Mr. Kanalakis, if you also want to talk about how that would work. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd been approached by a number of councillors, Joanne, over the last couple of days about reducing park hours. I indicated that I'd bring that to staff to come up with a proposal. What they've recommended, I fully support. That it be brought up to potentially reducing from 11 to 9, based on the problem parks. You know, there's 6 or 7 parks that consistently have challenges with people staying later in the evening. And what's going to happen now is that all members of council will be asked if they have parks or a park that they feel that this would be helpful to in the midst of a pandemic, to put that on the list. Those parks will then be signed later this week, because we have to have a sign that indicates when the parks will close at 9 instead of 11 for these select parks. Excuse me. And then the enforcement would start this weekend on those parks. Excuse me. So I think this is a very good compromise between an all-out reduction in every park, because most of the parks, as you know, do not have problems of rowdyism and drinking in parks and causing a disturbance and so on. Let's focus on the specific parks that we continuously get a number of calls on and deal with those in a prudent manner. Thank you.
En français, s'il vous plaît.
Some councillor called me lately, and we were asking if it was a good idea to actually impose a curfew in municipal parks. I asked staff at the City of Ottawa, as well as Mr. DeMonte, and he had a better suggestions. We would ask the councillors to tell us which parks are a little bit, let's say, more in which we have issues. We will have signs posting the new opening hours. Afterwards, we will proceed with enforcement in these parks, and we will start this weekend. I think this is a good compromise. I would say that the majority of the parks in Ottawa do not have any issues. As we saw about 1 week ago over the weekend, we had many challenges in some areas. This is my objective today, trying to reduce any issues that we may have in Ottawa parks. And for that, we need the agreements of the councillors. Thank you.
Joanne, do you have a follow-up? All right, we'll move on to Alex Gouge, City News, Ottawa.
I'm sorry. Hello. I had muted myself. I still have a follow-up question, but I was thinking that Mr. Kanellakos is also going to comment on how the park closing would work, right? I mean, the councillors get to ask for it. I mean, it seems like it'll be different across the city. So how would that work out?
Hi, Joanne. No, as the mayor said, and I think he covered it comprehensively. He asked us to look at it. For us, it's a matter of identifying which parks are problematic, discussing with the ward councillor, getting their concurrence, and if they agree, we'd put signage up, and then those parks would be on the patrol route, basically, of Ottawa bylaw and Ottawa Police. We're planning to also add park ambassadors to those parks to have people there to help educate people and ensure that they're informed that the park has reduced hours. And if problems start appearing, we want to get to them earlier rather than later. Usually they happen after dark when people assemble, and it's very hard to remove people after dark from an enforcement perspective. So our view is that we want to be proactive in the problematic parks, make sure people are aware, and ensure that people are clearing the parks before they settle in for an evening of partying like we saw last weekend. And as the mayor said, we are, we're being reasonable here in the sense that most parks are not a problem. They're community parks, they're passive parks, parks in my neighborhood. You see families out there, you see people exercising, but they usually leave by dark. It's the other parks that seem to attract large gatherings on social media. People are commenting, and next thing you know, people are congregating and heading towards particular locations in the city where they can party. And we want to make sure that we nip it in the bud before the party gets going, and we don't have a repeat of last weekend. We really believe that in all other circumstances, people are being responsible, and we hope that they continue to be responsible considering the situation we're in right now.
Yeah, thank you. That leads to my follow-up question, and that is, and perhaps, again, maybe for you, Mr. Kay or Mr. DeMonte, and that is, how much of a problem is this partying? Because we have lots of complaints. I think probably the city has had lots of complaints. Certainly in the media, we get a lot of notes about people not really following the gathering rules outdoors, playing soccer, playing volleyball in large groups, having picnics, sharing food with people who don't seem to be in the same household. The curfew is not going to stop that, right? So, I mean, what is the issue? What is the plan to address those kind of gatherings? And as well, do you have the bylaw capacity to respond to all of these complaints, whether they're during the day or at night?
Yeah, so thank you, Joanne. They're all good questions. So the limiting the hours in specific parks are, as Mr. Kanellakos and the mayor explained, are one measure that we're looking at. Ottawa Police are partnering with us for some of the other issues that you've talked about. These discussions have taken place as well with our medical officer of health, and I know there's a technical briefing this afternoon. So some of the issues you're talking about also we've looked at, and we'll be looking and discussing that this afternoon at the technical briefing at Public Health as well too. So they're all part of the situation. Listen, I don't want to steal the thunder of this afternoon, but the CEOs of the hospitals have been pretty clear what's happening in our hospitals, our ICUs. This third wave is dramatically impacting the health of our community. It is quite serious, and so yes, to your question, we're looking at all sorts of strategies to assist those who are following public health measures, but those who aren't, to try to have some tools to be able to intervene. This reduction of hours in parks is one, but this afternoon I know you'll be hearing others as well.
Thank you.
I think if I could just add one other comment to what Tony just mentioned. You're going to hear this afternoon with the technical briefing some pretty somber news and statistics. For the first time ever, there are going to be ICU beds for adult patients at CHEO. That's never happened before. Yesterday, we received, I believe, 3 or 4 patients from the GTA to come into ICU units here in Ottawa. So we have to continue to get the message out that it is completely irresponsible for groups of 20 and 30 and 40 people to gather at a park or anywhere, quite frankly, playing volleyball or playing an organized soccer game. And we have to do whatever we can within our limited scope of powers to ensure that these kinds of activities don't continue. You know, the mess that was made, for instance, at Vincent Massey Park, and we saw at Mooney's Bay Park, it was just one part of a serious situation, and we want to deal with these flare-ups in specific parks on a proactive basis so that they don't grow into something that becomes completely out of control and becomes an even bigger super spreader event that will affect one's health in our city. Merci. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to Alex Gouge, City News, Ottawa.
Hello. I just have one question for today. Mayor Watson, after homophobic comments were painted in front of your house, how important is International Day of Pink today this year to you and to our community?
Well, thank you, Alex. It's always a reminder that there are still some people out there that, you know, are homophobic or transphobic, that bully people who happen to be, you know, gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans. And it's a reminder that, you know, we still have those people who have a lot of hate in their heart, that they're upset and angry with people because of their sexual orientation. So hopefully by us wearing pink, I have a sort of a little bit of pink on this shirt. I didn't read the memo as quickly, as thoroughly as I should have, but it's a reminder to all of our society members, whether you're gay or lesbian or straight, that you know, words do hurt and actions do matter. And I appreciate so many members of council wearing pink today as a reminder that we still have a long way to go in terms of acceptance in our society. And the symbol of a pink shirt, I think, is powerful in this day and age. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex. We'll now move on to Ted Raymond, CTV Ottawa.
Hi there. I'm going to go back to the parks thing for a little bit, and I'm just wondering if we can describe a little bit more about if there are any other measures. I believed, Mayor Watson, you mentioned also possibly instituting mandatory masks in parks. Is that something that's still on the table?
Yeah, I'll ask Tony to comment on that. We did, as you know, pass the extension of the mask bylaw here in Ottawa. But Tony, do you want to take the specifics?
Sure, Mayor. Thanks. And kind of I hinted to Joanne's earlier question, your colleague. We're looking at this broadly. We're in a public health emergency. Things are not going the right way. I think at the technical briefing, our Associate Medical Officer of Health will give you the data to show you where things are going, and this is very serious. The Mayor mentioned for the first time in our history, CHEO is going to be taking adults in an ICU capacity here in Ottawa, and we're receiving transfers from the GTA. So what we've done is a broad approach. This morning, the limiting of hours in certain only specific parks that we talked about the process with the ward councillor. That's one element, but you'll see this afternoon that we have other elements that we're looking at. So the broad elements about, you know, should we be playing basketball? What does that mean? All that needs a medical lens, a public health lens, and that has been done. And those types of descriptors I'll leave to our Associate Medical Officer of Health. So there'll be other tools that'll be available to us that are part of a broad approach of what's medically necessary to turn things around, what we need to do, and what enforcement tools we're going to give both Ottawa Police and our bylaw officers to support us returning and flattening this curve.
Okay, thank you. And for my follow-up, in terms of enforcement of the curfew, I guess, or the shorter hours in parks, is this still kind of a discretionary thing, or is this going to be a zero tolerance situation where anyone, if they're walking their dog, for example, or just passing through, is up for a ticket?
Yeah, so again, our officers and Ottawa police officers and others that will be enforcing in the parks have discretion. The objective here, and I think Mr. Kanalakis hinted too, and my mother used to say, no good happens after dark. You know, 9 o'clock families that are enjoying these parks, even the ones that will be, with the concurrence of the ward councillor, targeted to be closed earlier. You know, at that time, there's no issue. After that, when you walk through the park, listen, the bylaw is clear. You can be ticketed if you're in the park after 9 o'clock. In these parks, it'll be signed and that. But our bylaw officers use judgment. If you're walking through to go to get transit or something, that's not the issue. What we're talking about is groups amalgamating, they're starting to party, doing bonfires, that type of behavior. So this gives us a tool then to intervene rapidly and not wait till 11 o'clock or after dark. So that's what this is all about. And again, I would put it in the context, and I repeat, this afternoon's technical briefing, when we hear the sobering stats and when we hear our Associate Medical Officer of Health and our Chief Medical Officer of Health saying that our community is going the wrong way. We've heard from our CEOs of the hospitals. We know what's happening in our ICUs. This third wave is very serious, and we need these tools to continue to support the few that are not following the behaviors that are expected. The vast majority of this community is, and we have to continue to do that. So I want to put it in that context.
Thank you, Ted. We'll now be going to Craig Lord at Global Ottawa.
Thanks very much. Following up on some of Ted's questions there, when it comes to the enforcement of this bylaw, how is Ottawa bylaw going to ensure that this new policy isn't weaponized against some of the more vulnerable people in Ottawa, people who are homeless or racialized residents who might get 311 called on them just because they're walking through a park at night? You know, how are you going to make sure that the most vulnerable residents of Ottawa are protected under this?
So, good question. I mean, you know, I don't want to go and say that the officers understand, and we all understand what this is about. This is about a public health emergency that we're under. This is a tool. Our approach is one of reasonable, you know, intervention. Whether for homeless people, for instance, in the provincial order, there are exemptions for that. Those aren't the people we're targeting. We talked about what we're targeting, and I know, I understand your question, but this is about people that we saw last weekend, you know, partying and having bonfires and drinking. These aren't, you know, the people you're describing, you know, the vulnerable homeless, that type of thing. As a matter of fact, our bylaw officers, when we see those situations, our intervention actually with them on a regular basis is to see if we can help them out in any way and hook them up with any social supports on a daily basis. Those aren't the people that are going to be targeted in this approach, far from it. And again, this is just another tool in a context of truly a public health emergency that's not going the right way.
So one of the things you said is that, you know, this gives you a tool to intervene more quickly, not wait 2 hours for a park to be closed. But the things that you've listed, you know, gatherings under the provincial order, drinking, and violence, as the case was in Mooney's Bay, these are already prohibited. So how does a curfew help?
So again, I mean, I know we're all using the word curfew. It's not a curfew. We're changing the hours of operation of our parks. Instead of closing at 11, some specific parks that will have been identified and with the concurrence of the ward council will close at 9. So it's, you know, 2 hours. And that makes a big difference from enforcement. To your earlier question, it does. We're not arriving at 11 o'clock when it's dark, when the crowds are there, when the rowdiness has begun. It's a different approach. When we get a complaint and it's just after 9 and we're arriving, we're able to intervene in a different environment, and it's not you know, the pitch black and the crowds have started. So it is really, I know you're hinting towards bringing me down that path, but I don't want to go there. That's not what this is about. This is about us fulfilling our role, like each and every other citizen's fulfilling their role in following the public health orders. For those who aren't, and particularly in these parks, parks, that we don't end up with what happened on the weekend. These events can become big spreader events and can create tremendous trouble for our community, and we don't want that to happen. And so this allows us to approach these activities in a different context than when it's dark at midnight and it's pitch black outside and the partying has already begun.
Thank you, Craig. Nous allons maintenant passer à Julien.
Now we have Julien Paquette, you have the floor from Le Droit. Maybe I didn't understand part of the memorandum. So to identify the parks that do have issues, you're reducing the opening hours. So you're asking councillors to communicate with staff to put together the list. I know that there's at least one councillor that is not as active since his salary suspension. So are you going to pay attention to that specific ward? First of all, we already have a preliminary analysis of the different parks.
And others that will be enforcing in the parks have discretion.
I apologize.
The objective
We
here, I think Mr.
are experiencing technical difficulties, and we will be with you shortly.
We'll try again. Alors, nous avons déjà...
We already started establishing a list of 6 or 7 parks in which we had issues. So if these councillors do agree with us, we will target these parks and will reduce the opening hours. They will be closed by 9 o'clock. Other councillors can identify if they have issues in certain parks, if they have complaints from their members. The list may evolve. We may not have issues with some park. This situation can change. Councillor will get in touch with us. So we will work hand in hand with the different councillors to make sure that this list is always up to date. Sorry for the technical issue that we have. What was the second part of your question? I think you did answer my question. Thank you. Follow-up question? So right now, we have a measure to reduce any issues that we can have in the evening in the parks. How about what could happen during daytime? Sometime on the weekends when it's a beautiful day, we have many gatherings, families, people will celebrate in the parks. It's not always in the evening. Are you going to have a proactive approach for these moments? Good question. We're talking about park opening hours. But throughout the days, we're asking the population to follow public health recommendations. We have a team of officials that will patrol proactively these parks. We also have the support of the police, Ottawa Police, to support the patrols. So we will intensify the patrols and we'll go mainly in the parks, like you said. If we have any issues during daytime, we will try to intervene before it gets out of hands. So I talked to your colleague in English. All of these approaches that were stated this morning are part of a broader set of initiative in terms of public health. We will get into a technical information session this afternoon. Then you have a better idea what will happen within the City of Ottawa, not only with the different parks, but the other activities that may have a negative impact on public health in Ottawa. Thank you very much.
Merci, Julien.
Thank you, Julien.
Going to John Willing at the Ottawa Citizen.
Thank you. Mayor Watson, hello. I'm wondering which parks, if any, do you think should have an early closing time?
Well, I'll leave that up to our city staff to liaise with members of council, but we know, for instance, it's usually the bigger parks that have the most number of calls of complaints from neighbors. Obviously, Vincent Massey, Mooney's Bay are two examples in the south end where we had considerable problems and vandalism and drinking in public on the weekend. So it tends to be the larger parks. It's not the little pocket parks, the community parks that are a big problem. But the benefit of asking members of council to look into their wards, they know their wards best, and they know when there's a large number of phone calls coming in complaining about a particular park, that's probably the park, one of the parks that they may put on the list. And someone asked, how will people know about this? They'll be signed. It'll also be on the city website, I think, Tony, so that people can check. But I think, generally speaking, the top 10 list, I guess, of parks tend to be those that are larger in nature. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. A question, I don't know if this is for Mr. DeMonte or Mr. Kanellakis. Have you approached any ward councillors so far under this new regime recommending to implement early closing times at a park? And just a second part of that question, it sounds the way that you described it, I think it was Mr. Kanellakis, that it's now or never if we're going to implement an early closing time for a park so that you can get signs up for the weekend. Will this regime continue in subsequent weeks, or are you just looking at implementing some measures now that could last, for example, for the rest of the stay-at-home order?
No, thank you, John. I'll just start and I'll turn it over to Tony. I mean, just a reminder, and there's been a few questions from your last previous colleagues about daytime and people being in the park. I mean, I do want to remind everyone we have a provincial stay-at-home order. And the order basically says that unless you're going to the grocery store, pharmacy, accessing health services, getting vaccinated, or outdoor exercise, or work that cannot be done remotely, you should be staying home. And that's the guideline. And so congregating in parks is we want people to get exercise, to get fresh air. We understand the challenges on mental health and all the other issues when people have to stay home. So we're being, I think, very reasonable in terms of enforcement, as Mr. DeMonte said. But the issue around the evenings and when people, and I'm not calling it a curfew, the parks are open 15 hours a day rather than 17 hours a day for the ones that are going to be designated. So when we talk about a few hours earlier, this is really about our ability, in amongst the other tools we have, to try and manage these situations before they become problematic. And there will be, enforcement throughout the day and patrols throughout the day to check on parks, particularly the problematic parks, so that they don't get out of hand earlier. But once it gets dark, it makes it much more difficult once the complaints start coming in the last weekend, when they were coming in late at night, for police and bylaw to respond and to effectively be able to manage the situation once a lot of people are able to get entrenched in the park, drinking and partying and all the rest of the things that are happening. And I can tell you that the councillors, I've heard from some, and they have different views in terms of which parks it may be, but that process is going to start now. The mayor had asked us several days ago to look at this. We did convene our group, and we did have a thorough discussion and flush this out in terms of what the best approach is. And I think, as the mayor said, I think we found a reasonable approach, a compromise in terms of dealing with problematic areas, yet not dropping the hammer and restricting people from using all parks. I will remind people that a year ago, all parks were shut down. When we had, and the situation wasn't as severe as it was now. There were no parks open at all. And I think, people are reacting to, maybe a couple parks will have 2 hours less. I don't think that's unreasonable after what we saw last weekend, that we send the message out loud and clear that we're not tolerating that kind of activity in the parks late at night, where you're creating super spreader events and putting our broader community in jeopardy. So we will be reaching out to the councillors today. We do believe we have enough time. Well, we know we have enough time to get the signs ready for the parks that will be have our restrictions before the weekend. And we hope to nail it down by tomorrow with the councillors, then get out and do the signage late Thursday and on Friday, and then be ready to go for Saturday.
Sorry, just Steve, so you have some parks in mind that you are going to recommend some early closing times?
As Tony said, we have the parks, probably about half a dozen to a dozen parks that are on the list of ones that were problematic based on our calls for service and incidents. And we'll be approaching those ward councillors first to say, look, here's where the situation is. What do you want to do? Are you on for restricting the hours on those particular parks? And if other councillors, as the mayor said, you know, there are situations that we're not aware of because there was a backup of calls last weekend. We had more calls than we could process, quite frankly. And if there are other issues that councillors are aware of and they know their ward best, we will take those too and deal with those also. So we're reaching out to all of council members today. It's actually starting to happen right now.
I think maybe, John, just to add one other thing that was important, excuse me, that Steve just mentioned, is that we do have a stay-at-home order, but one of the exceptions is exercise. So we encourage people to use our parks responsibly, exercise, stay with those who only live in your household. Those are the rules, those are the regulations. Drinking lots of beer and smashing beer bottles is not exercise, and it's not welcome in parks in Ottawa, plain and simple. So if people are going to act that irresponsibly, they should be kicked out at an earlier hour so they're not causing grief or harm to those people who are legitimately using the parks for exercise because they don't have a backyard or they are not able to bring their kids anywhere else. They want to use that park. And we want the park to be in good shape and safe for people to go and exercise with their household unit and not have to put up with this kind of irresponsible, ridiculous behavior by a certain group of people that wants to go and, you know, have a cake party in a public park. That's not on. And so what we're asking members of council to do is that we will provide them with any parks in their ward that have challenges, and they will then decide whether they believe that we should reduce the hours by 2 hours. Instead of the park closing at 11, it would close at 9. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Nous allons maintenant à Antoine.
We will give the floor now to Antoine Trépanier, Radio-Canada. Hello, Mr. Mayor. Mylène Drouin in Montreal is a medical public health responsible. She asked the government of Quebec to impose roadblocks on the bridges. I was wondering, are you participating in these discussions, looking at roadblocks on the bridges? Right now, are you worried? Are you worried that the higher number of cases in Ontario will be a threat for Gatineau? Yes, I did talk to the mayor, Maxime Pedneau-Jobin, last week. The message is very clear. Please stay in Gatineau if you live there. Stay in Ottawa if you live in Ottawa. It's not a good idea to cross the river if you do not have a specific reason, such as going to work in a hospital. When you're talking about road blockages at the border, like I said previously, it's not a priority for me. And it's the same opinion. Chief Slowly has the same opinion. So both provinces will have to make a decision on that. But for right now, I haven't heard anything. I'm not aware of any discussion at the provincial level at this time. Follow-up question? How many cases should we have before you would be in favor of a roadblock? Last spring, you said it was not appropriate, but right now we have an eclosion, an outbreak. What would be the limit, the upper limit, before you change your opinion? If Dr. Etches says that we have to, and it's a good idea to impose roadblocks, of course. I will take her suggestion very seriously, and I will talk with the Prime Minister Ford. Like I said before, I respect Dr. Etches and her team's recommendations. Right now, it's not the case. So I'm just waiting for her recommendations. Thank you. Thank you, Antoine.
On to Sue Sharing on the City from the Burbs.
Yeah, Mayor Watson, I'm just wondering about why you had originally suggested that all parks would be under this proposed motion. It seems from everything you and Tony have said that it would make more sense and be easier for people to understand. Why not just include all parks?
Yeah, thanks, Sue, for the question. What I said yesterday was that I've asked staff to look into the option of closing parks earlier, and they came back in the last 24 hours, I guess. We've had a number of Zoom calls and indicated what they thought would be a better suggestion was just go to those parks that are causing grief in neighborhoods and a lot of headaches for bylaw and for residents who use the parks legally and for enjoyment of exercise. So I thought it was a good solution to consult the members of council because they know their wards better than anyone else, and where there may be a problem, that the reduction in hours would take place with a properly signed program at those individual parks. Excuse me. So I think, sorry, I'm losing my voice.
My wishes are coming.
Sorry, I was saying I think that you know what we're going to do now over the course of the next day or so is reach out to all members of council because they know, you know, I know for instance Councillor Brockington had a number of problems on the weekend at both Mooney's Bay as well as Vincent Massey Park in his ward. So I've heard from other councillors who have other problems in their wards, and once the list is provided, it will go up on our city website. Public service announcement will go out about it, and signs will be posted at all of the entrances. That's the legal requirement under the bylaw. And that will then give bylaw an opportunity to proactively deal with a potential problem that's swirling out of control in some of our parks. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mayor. I think the next person as a follow-up, but as my second question to Tony, I appreciate what the mayor is saying, but it seems like you're putting a lot on the councillors. Why not just treat? There's a potential in every ward, obviously, for this to happen. So, and you guys have said how dangerous this is. So why not just, you know, do the entire city, treat everyone fairly, and if there's not an issue in a few wards, then all the better.
Yeah, Sue, thanks for the question. I think, you know, it is a balanced approach. There are other considerations. There are public health considerations. We talked about mental health. We talked about people who have challenges. So to close every park, the 13+ parks that we have, one that seems to be a swath that is perhaps an overreaction. There are some small parkettes that people use every day that have never been problematic and continue to not be problematic. We've got the opportunity to close other parks as things evolve, if they evolve negatively. So I think it's both an appropriate approach. The other thing too is a resourcing capability, and I want to remind, as Steve mentioned, you know, we're in a stay-at-home order as well. It's, you know, the objective here is to support our public health objective of all of us in this community, is to ensure that we can turn this around, this very serious situation that is evolving and continuing to evolve very negatively in our community. So by targeting specific parks that are problematic, I'm of the opinion that that's the appropriate approach instead of just doing a broad swath across the city.
But essentially the rules are the same for every park. It's just that some parks could be monitored more vehemently.
Yeah, so just quickly on that, I mean, I want to put things in perspective. We're diminishing the number of hours and maybe some specific parks, a limited amount that we know are problematic or that councillors may identify in their ward that are problematic, by 2 hours. So instead of closing at 11, they're closing at 9. Every other park remains the same. We will continue to patrol the entire community, all the parks. If we receive calls, we'll intervene on those one-offs. But I think what you'll see is the parks that have been identified, and the mayor referred to that, are often those big parks that tend to be problematic. Those chose right away we're going to reduce the hours by 2 hours to avoid, as we discussed earlier, you know, the issues of at night, et cetera. It's a very different intervention when you arrive in daylight and you disperse people that are partying versus, you know, by the time the park closes, it's midnight, 1 o'clock, we get the call, we arrive. It's a very different intervention, and so I think this is not only an appropriate approach, it's one that shows that we're using this as an enforcement tool to support our public health objectives and the stay-at-home that we have.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. This is all the time that we have.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, Kendra. Can I just ask for clarification? It's Joanne. One of the big parks that's a problem we are hearing is Vincent Massey Park. It's an NCC park. How will enforcement work there? What's going on with that one? Thanks. Sorry to butt in.
No, not at all, Joanne. I think that's a good question, and we didn't bring it up. So we've been talking with our NCC partners. As the mayor mentioned, we've had several Zoom calls, and they've been participating. Any calls that come in sites will be referred back to the NCC. They are currently saying to us, and as a responsible corporation, they're saying that they'll be following our lead because this is a public health emergency. And so they are going to be adjusting based on some of the discussions we've had even this morning. They're going to adjust their posture, and they will be intervening in their parks or parkways as well, the parkways that are closed. So that won't be a bylaw. It'll be the NCC. I think they're either going to engage the RCMP to intervene, or Ottawa Police said they would assist as well too. So they will be, I guess the right term, and more directly to your question, assuming the same posture as we're having for their parks.
Thanks very much.
This is all the time that we have. C'est tout le temps que nous disposons aujourd'hui. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.